Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I have to admit, this was not the episode I expected to make me look at Willow differently. Like many longtime General Hospital viewers, I've spent months watching her make one questionable decision after another. There were times when I honestly wondered if the compassionate woman we once knew had completely disappeared. The writers have pushed Willow so far into selfish choices and frustrating behavior that it became difficult to remember why so many fans supported her in the first place. That's why the June 17 episode caught my attention. It wasn't because of a shocking twist or a dramatic confrontation. It was because, for one brief moment, I saw something in Willow that had been missing for a very long time. When Willow brought Drew to the hospital for his medical evaluation, the focus initially seemed to be on Drew's recovery and whatever consequences might come next for him. However, the scene quickly became about something much more emotional. Scout was injured, Danny was helping her, and Molly arrived in a panic after hearing that something had happened. The tension in the room was impossible to ignore. Everyone seemed worried about much more than a hurt ankle. Beneath the surface was a deeper fear that Scout could once again be caught in the middle of adult conflicts and family struggles. After everything this child has already endured, that fear felt completely understandable. What struck me most was Scout's vulnerability. She wasn't worried about legal battles, family politics, or who might gain the upper hand. She was worried about losing the people she loves. She didn't want to be separated from Danny, from her grandmother, or from her aunt. As someone who has watched this show for years, I found that incredibly moving because children often see situations in the simplest and most honest way possible. Scout wasn't asking for power or control. She was asking for stability, comfort, and the reassurance that her family would still be there tomorrow. This is where Willow surprised me. Instead of making the situation about herself, she focused entirely on Scout's feelings. That may sound like a small thing, but considering Willow's recent behavior, it felt significant. For once, she wasn't trying to defend herself, justify her actions, or gain an advantage. She simply listened. She saw a frightened little girl standing in front of her and responded with kindness. Watching that scene, I couldn't help but feel that the old Willow was peeking through the cracks. The way Willow reassured Scout felt genuine to me. She promised that she would do everything she could to make sure Scout would not be separated from the people she loves again. What made the moment stand out was that there was nothing in it for Willow. There was no obvious benefit, no manipulation, and no hidden agenda. She wasn't trying to win someone's approval. She wasn't trying to score points against anyone else. Her attention was completely focused on making Scout feel safe. After months of watching Willow make choices that seemed centered around her own wants and needs, seeing her put someone else first was honestly refreshing. As I watched, I found myself remembering the Willow we first met years ago. Back then, she was known for her compassion and her willingness to help others. She was someone who naturally cared about people. Over time, that version of Willow became harder and harder to find. Every new mistake seemed to bury that side of her a little deeper. Yet this conversation with Scout reminded me that maybe those qualities never truly disappeared. Maybe they were simply overshadowed by bad decisions, emotional wounds, and poor judgment. At the same time, I couldn't ignore what was happening around her. Drew's reactions throughout these scenes felt important. Longtime soap fans know that sometimes a single look can tell a bigger story than an entire page of dialogue. The expression on Drew's face when he saw Scout with Danny made me feel like trouble is brewing. It felt like one of those moments that writers intentionally place in front of viewers as a warning sign. Something tells me that once Drew fully regains his strength and freedom, his priorities may not align with what Scout actually needs. That possibility makes Willow's promise even more interesting. I couldn't help wondering if she already sees the danger ahead. Perhaps she realizes that someone will eventually have to fight for Scout's emotional well-being. Perhaps she understands that Drew may not always make decisions based on what is best for his daughter. If that's the case, Willow's concern for Scout could become much more important in the weeks ahead than many viewers realize right now. Another thing that stood out to me was how natural Willow seemed while talking to Scout. Earlier in the storyline, she helped Chase and Brooklyn with baby Phoebe, but there was always a lingering feeling that other motivations were involved. Whether Willow wanted to admit it or not, much of her attention seemed connected to Chase. This situation felt completely different. There was no emotional game being played. There was no hidden objective. There was only a worried child and an adult trying to comfort her. That sincerity is what made the scene work so well. Now, I don't think one touching conversation suddenly erases all of Willow's mistakes. That would be far too easy. She has hurt people, made selfish choices, and ignored warnings that should have been impossible to miss. Those actions still matter. They still have consequences. Viewers have every right to remain skeptical about her intentions moving forward. Trust is not something that can be rebuilt overnight, especially after everything that has happened. Still, redemption stories rarely begin with grand gestures. More often, they begin with small moments that remind us who a character truly is underneath all the mistakes. That's exactly what this felt like to me. For the first time in months, Willow wasn't focused on revenge, control, or personal gain. She was focused on a child who needed reassurance. She was focused on someone else's happiness rather than her own. Of course, if I've learned anything from decades of watching soap operas, it's that complicated characters rarely stay on a straight path for very long. As people often say where I grew up, old habits die hard. It would not surprise me at all if Willow eventually found a way to use her concern for Scout as part of a larger plan. In fact, I'd be shocked if future complications didn't arise. This is Port Charles after all. Nothing stays simple for long. Even so, I can't deny what I saw in that hospital room. For a brief moment, Willow looked like the woman she used to be. She looked caring, protective, and genuinely invested in someone else's well-being. That may not be enough to redeem her yet, but it is enough to remind me why so many fans once believed in her. And who knows? If Scout eventually becomes the reason Willow chooses a better path, this small conversation could end up being far more important than any of us realize today. As I finished watching this episode, I found myself thinking about something I never expected to say again. Maybe Willow still has a chance. Not because she suddenly became a hero, and certainly not because all her mistakes should be forgotten, but because for one brief moment, she showed genuine compassion without expecting anything in return. In a town where almost everyone has an agenda, and every act of kindness is often tied to a larger scheme, that simple conversation with Scout felt surprisingly real. What makes this storyline so interesting to me is that Scout may end up seeing something in Willow that many adults no longer can. Children often recognize sincerity before anyone else does, and Scout witnessed a side of Willow that has been hidden for a very long time. If future events place Willow in serious trouble because of her involvement with Drew, I would not be surprised if Scout becomes one of the few people willing to believe there is still goodness left inside her. At the same time, I can't ignore the possibility that this moment may become much more important than it appears today. General Hospital has a habit of planting small emotional scenes that later grow into major turning points. Willow's promise to Scout could eventually force her to choose between protecting a child she genuinely loves and standing by a man whose actions may become increasingly difficult to defend. If that day comes, we may finally learn who Willow truly is, beneath all the mistakes, lies, and poor decisions that have defined her recent story. For now, though, I think the biggest takeaway is simple. After months of watching a version of Willow that felt almost impossible to recognize, we were finally reminded that the caring woman she once was may not be completely gone. The question is whether this was merely a fleeting moment of kindness or the first step toward a long overdue redemption. Knowing Port Charles, the road ahead will probably be messy, painful, and filled with unexpected twists. But for the first time in a long while, I'm actually curious to find out where Willow's journey goes next.